All right, in this video, we're going to continue our conversation related to team workflow. And so in the last video, we talked about three different workflows or three different strategies in terms of how to use version control within your organization or as a team. There's the branching strategy, there's the forking strategy, and then there's this idea of creating an organization so that you can administer read-write privileges to different folks who are working on a particular application. Let's spend this time here talking about branching strategy. And then if we have time here, we'll focus on forking. So branching, and this here is where you and your teams will agree upon how many branches, what type of strategy you're going to have for the various branches you'll have within your application. And so here, if we look down, and I'll come back to the slide here, but here's a better picture of kind of what we see on this slide. And so if you look at this image here, you'll see that the master branch, and there's some different versions. And so there's some semantic versioning that's happening with the different releases. And typically your master branch is a lot of times synonymous with your production, the application that's that's hosted, and that's the application that your end user is going to use. You have what we call hot fixes, where there may be just a spelling error, or there may be a small bug that's like a image that's basically taking a long time to render. So a team member may just jump on a hot fix branch and begin to fix the application, and then increment the versioning, the semantic versioning, to show that that fix has been that hot fixes or that particular bug has been fixed. Then you have releases, where you run these sprints. And you'll work over a certain time period. It may be implementing a new interface or adding some new functionality, such as a contact form. But you have a development branch, and then within this development branch, you'll have different where each team or a team member could work on different features. And so one feature may be adding a newsletter form to the website. But after so many features are added, then you will basically go for a release, which essentially will increase the semantic versioning number. And that's kind of like what you see with iOS apps and Android apps, where they release these major, like iOS 10, right? That's because they've been working on a number of different features, and they've eventually decided to push it out to the end user. And so this is kind of the branching strategy. In this case here, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 branches. Different companies do have different strategies in terms of how they term or name these branches. But nonetheless, you'll see something very similar to this. Is kind of very, how would you say it? This is more common in the industry to see kind of this type of branching strategy or workflow for teams in the industry. Here is just a few steps that you may want to take as a team. And so if you're working with a team, you want to figure out who's going to be the team lead. If you're using some type of agile process or Scrum, you have the Scrum Master, right? But who's going to be the team lead? And this person is going to give guidance to your various projects, or give guidance to the project, and then creates the repository, or they'll be the person who kind of maintains the code repository. Number 2 is team lead initiates the project by creating repository and uploading project. And this is what we're going to do here. We're going to walk through this activity in the next slide here. And there's going to be some steps where you'll work with this with your team, or go through this process with your team. The team determines the strategy for the remote branches. And so that's kind of what these are here. There's going to be hotfix, release, develop, feature. And then based on your team branching strategy, you're going to create the branches on the remote repository. So here's an application that I did a couple years ago, 3 years ago, where it's a Super Bowl web app, where it just basically shows all the stats on the different Super Bowls that we've had over the years. So we only have one master branch, but in your team, you may decide to have multiple remote branches, such as the ones that you see here on this one here. So you may have a hotfix branch, you may have a release branch, and you may have a development branch. And the feature branches come and go, right? The feature branch may be where a team member is working on, like I said, a newsletter component to your web app, but that feature branch may get deleted. And so you can have feature branches that that don't last for a long time. So once you add in, for instance, where you see my mouse or something, you have 2 different commits. You'll push that up and then you'll delete the feature, and then it'll be a new feature branch that comes on. But this development branch will stay long term, as well as this release branch will stay long term, and as well as the hotfix. But the features may come and go. And so those will get created here. You can create these via command line, or you can just do it via in this case with GitHub, you can do it via the GUI or this interface that you see here. And like I said, you'll run through this process with your team, where if the team lead will assign a particular feature to a team member, and they'll run they'll make their iterations. They'll agree, they'll have some type of communication process. If it's good, they'll push it back up to the development branch, and that'll continually happen with your team members. And so this team member will be working on another feature, and you have to work with your team lead to make sure that you have the most latest and updated code from the development branch. And then ultimately, once you've added so many features into the application, you will then push that up to the production branch, and that will be an official release. And so, so like I said, that's one strategy, which is the branching strategy, which is a very common strategy used in the industry. So here's kind of a short process of what you'll be doing here. You'll create a branch. This may be a feature branch. You'll add your code. Once you're done, you'll make your series of commits. You'll push that up to your branch, not the master branch. You'll push it up to your feature branch. And it's then at that moment where you'll agree, you'll talk with your team members, whether or not you'll open up a pull request. You'll talk with your team members, you'll discuss and review, and then the team lead and as well as your team members will give the okay, and then you'll push that or merge that into your development branch, not the master, but your development branch. Like I said, it's only at a certain point where we want to basically push that to production once we have a particular strategy in terms of when we'll go to production once we have so many features completed. So this is kind of the process that you'll take as a team. So this next slide is going to walk you through. We'll do this during our synchronous session together as a team, where we'll walk through these various steps and do the branching strategy. This next one here is the forking strategy, where you would have, and like I said, this is a little different from the branching. The forking strategy is where not everybody has read and write access. It's a little bit more secure in the sense that the person who created the remote repository where my mouse is hovering, they have total full control of it. But then people can fork the repository and make their adjustments. So let me show you a quick example of this. Let me see if I can let me pause here and I'll show you a repository. All right, so here's a repository where I forked 2 years ago. I basically forked a repository called WooBike, which is basically a documentation on bike sharing APIs, a bunch of different APIs where you can pull data from to see certain information about those particular scooters or bikes. And so one of them is the birds that you see in the cities. You can pull in information and see where all the birds are located. It has latitude and longitude information, the battery charge of the bird scooter, and so forth. But this is a repository that works with a whole bunch of ride sharing or bike sharing or scooter sharing APIs. But anyway, a couple years ago, 2 years ago, I forked the repository. And so here's the original repository where I forked it from. And so I'll go to that repository. And what you can do is there's a button here where you can say fork. And what it does is it replicates, it basically creates a repository for your account. It just replicates this code on your account. And so if I go back to my account, like I said, I have that repository from 2 years ago, and it's on my account, Instructor C, and I could begin to pull this code down, work with it, make adjustments, and then when I'm ready, I can go ahead and make a pull request. And so if I wanted to, I can go back to the original host of this repository, and then I can submit a pull request from my original from my repository, and then the owner of this particular repository can decide whether or not they would like to add in my adjustments or decline my adjustments. And so I don't have the ability to directly modify this owner's the owner of this code, but they have the ability to deny or accept the changes that I soliciting or that I'm offering for their repository. And so that's what this image is showing here, is that somebody owns the repository, but then we can fork the repository and basically create a duplicate on my own account. I could then pull that down to my local machine, work on the code, and continually do this workflow where I basically push up my changes and pull down the latest changes. But then when I'm ready, I'll then make a pull request to the owner of the remote repository. Like I said, they can either just accept or decline it. And like I said, that's how a lot of open source projects function. It's a bunch of people working on an application. It can be up to 300 people working on an application, but they are using this forking strategy where the people who are working on it don't have the read-write access, but they're making suggestions or they're making recommendations, and then the owner of the repository will decide whether or not those recommendations will be accepted or not. So that's the forking strategy. And we'll get some practice with this as well. But this is going to be some practice that we'll get during our synchronous session, and we'll walk through this, go through this as many times as needed, because this is going to be part of the team project at the end of the semester that that you'll have to work together and successfully version control and add some functionality to an existing application. All right, let me pause this video. The next video we're going to talk about is going to be over some of the different tools that GitHub offers, such as GitHub Pages. There's something called Gitpod now, but there's a lot of other cool things that GitHub Actions that make our lives a little bit easier in terms of continuous integration, continuous deployment, hosting our web application, as well as editing within a cloud or a web browser IDE. So stay tuned. And again, feel free to do some research on these workflows. They're used all the time. And like I said, we'll practice this during our synchronous session.